Perfect. So hello, everyone. We still have people joining us, so we'll give it a couple of seconds. But in the meantime, let me introduce the guest we all know and love, Emmanuel Straschnov, the co-founder, and the co-CEO of Bubble, the visual development platform that can be used to develop, create, and maintain the fully functional web applications and so much more. Emmanuel, welcome. Always great to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Okay, today we actually invited Emmanuel to talk. Today is going to be a very special conversation because Emmanuel has given a lot of great conversations, and I'm sure there will be so much more about the technology, about how exactly this is impacting the landscape in the IT world and the world in general. I never heard you speak a lot about what it actually took to create the tool, to build the team, because there's definitely a lot of success stories about people focusing on a product and telling how it's great, which it is. But I'm sure that a lot of founders could actually relate to the other challenge that this brings along: growing a team, creating a culture, and actually getting towards a certain, let's say, level. Especially this is interesting in the case of Bubble, because Bubble was running as a two-man startup for a lot of time. And then you were running Bootstrap for 7 years, if I'm not mistaken. So it's definitely interesting to hear more about the thought process of how exactly this unfolded. But let's start from the beginning. So when the whole thing began in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, it was just you and Josh. So and you were doing pretty much everything.
It was actually just Josh, because I joined him after a few, I think 3 or 4 months. So he started writing code on its own, and then was looking for someone to join him, and then I joined him.
Great. So, yeah. Still, in the course of the whole life cycle of your startup, it's practically from the very beginning. So
yeah, I take as much ownership in the idea and the concept than Josh today after 9 years. But,
I'll have a couple of questions about that as well. The co-founder to co-founder relationships is also something that is it's important and interesting to know about. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So here's you and Josh starting the whole thing. There's just two of you, early stage startup. And then at some point, basically, you're deciding to hire some people. So what changed? So what actually prompted you for running so long, for just being the two of you doing pretty much everything and learning a lot of skills on the way, I'm sure, to the point when you actually decided, okay, we actually need to build a team? What was the trigger and the decision point?
So it's been a little bit more complicated than that, because over the years, for the first 5 years, we sometimes had some conversations with a designer at first, and then we actually hired someone for a few months back in November 2015. It didn't work out. That person left, which is a pretty big thing for a 2-person team when you bring the third person and it doesn't work out. And so then we decided to not hire right away, just make sure the business was doing well before we hired again. And so that made us to wait 5 years. In the perfect scenario, we would only have done that for 3 years, which is still probably too long, but something more reasonable. The reason it changed again after 5 years, well, basically, we always knew that it was too big of a project for just 2 guys. I mean, I did enjoy just doing that, the 2 of us, because it's kind of addictive how efficient you are when you just have 2 people. You don't lose time like doing management, basically. You don't lose time hiring. Every minute you spend is actually like focused on the business, on the product, making users happy, more so than today, because today, I spent but anyone on the team spend a lot of time interviewing, management. That's the kind of things you have to do to create an organization, but it's not immediately impactful for our users. And sometimes, I hear our users telling us, hey, you've raised all that money. Can we move faster? No, actually, we're going to move slower because we raised all that money and we need to hire people. And so I did find that very addictive for some time. But then after 5 years, we started being like, okay, that can't just be the 2 of us. We started having too many requests on the product side and too many support tickets. Those are the 2 things where I just couldn't take them anymore. I saying I on that one because the support was done by me. I was the one doing a lot of support before. If we have some old users in the audience, they know that I was responding to every email till mid 2017. And at some point, it just was not scalable. And I decided, okay, let's pull the trigger and hire people. Looking back, we should have done that sooner. But again, what happened in 2015, 2016, hiring a third person and it not working out, led us to wait a little bit longer than we should have.
Right. So that's actually an interesting point and remark. I'm sure that a lot of folks listening to us are early stage founders and maybe even first time founders. And the question about when to hire, whether to hire, and what should be the criteria for getting a team expanded is definitely on top of their minds. So based on that experience of you hiring a third person and that not working out, how that exactly impacted your further expansion strategy? So were you asking the wrong questions, or were you looking for different things? So how exactly did you approach that the second time around?
We were much more structured. Like we put, hiring a process in place. Like the first hire we made was someone reaching out. He was kind of thinking about what we've been doing for some time. We had a few conversations that went well, and we were like, okay, let's try something. The next time, we actually, so for engineers and for success, for that matter, we would actually have like exercises, like case studies. We would do things like normal companies do them, which looking back today, I'm like, why didn't we do that in the first place? But then you know how it is,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and now to your question about when to hire, how to hire, each case is a little bit different. It depends on your financial means. Our bootstrapping history, the fact that we didn't fundraise, meant that we couldn't really hire someone late 2015. And to be transparently, I mean, his compensation was really low actually, because we couldn't, and we were basically taking none at that point. If someone raises money, you can certainly build a team sooner. So you have to deal with your constraints. And then, think carefully about what you need, who you want to hire, and have a process to make sure you're not going to make mistakes. But I would also say this, even if you have all these processes, you're going to make mistakes. I don't know a single company that didn't make hiring mistakes.
By the way, now that I mentioned that a lot of the listeners here and later on YouTube are going to be the first time founders, guys, you're very much encouraged to ask your questions that are related to hiring, building the culture, scaling the team, or anything else that you believe is going to be interesting for Emmanuel to talk about, because there's definitely a lot of learning, scaling a team from a 1-person, 2-person team to a team of, how much are you guys today? 60?
Yep, 60.
Yeah, that's a lot of percentage increase. So guys, and
but it's still very small compared to what people expect us to be at, and even compared to how much money we've raised, how many users we have, revenue. Like we should have more people, and that's why today, I mean, again, from the outside, people would probably think about the fundraising round, which is that like super exciting, and then everything is easy. Actually, no, it's actually harder now because we need to hire more people, and so we have less time to do things, and that's tough.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll absolutely, we'll talk about it in a second, because the culture can't remain the same, I guess, for 2 people and for 60 people, especially. And yeah, definitely raising a series probably adds more flavor on top of it. One thing I wanted to mention before we proceed is that Emmanuel will ask you to pick one question that you will like the most from today's session. That's very much encouraged from the audience to send us our way. And both Bubble team and Zero Code team will be sharing some Black Friday bonuses with you guys after the conversation. So definitely, we're very much looking forward to hearing some interesting questions from you. So coming back to the history. So yeah, you started to hire. Fast forward, that turned up into what's now a 60-person company, which is definitely not the end point, but it's a long way from where you guys were. So now that you're growing so fast, how are you organizing the process now? So who is taking care of it? And how are you managed to onboard the new members? Because I'm guessing that that's the most taxing part for any organization.
The hiring process?
Yes. How exactly are you hiring people?
Yeah, so we actually have a pretty big people team, I think, compared to other companies in percentage. Like today, we have 4 people full-time on the people side, from like a recruiting coordinator to a VP people. We just started a couple of weeks ago. And that's something we started fairly early on. So we started having like people on the like HR or people side quite early on, and they own the process. And then you have a hiring manager for each job. The hiring manager most of the time not being the people team. The people team helps, running the process and finding candidates. So it can be, VP engineering for engineers, can be me when I'm hiring for people for VP marketing, for instance, which I'm doing today. So each person, and then we've been pretty structured now on this, like, when the hiring manager wants to open a new job, they have to come up with a job description that is not just what you see on our website. It has more stuff than that, internal roles, interview processes, example of profiles that are pretty good. That gets approved, and then the people team runs with it. That's something that I think, again, looking back for the first time we hired where we didn't know what we were doing, we're doing a much better job at that now. It's still hard. The most challenging thing today in this market is just like finding candidates. Like the talent war is extremely intense currently. And so I think processes-wise, we're pretty good. We interview pretty well. I'm always curious to hear feedback from candidates in terms of how many, are we having too many interviews or not enough interviews? I think we're in a pretty good place though. But now we need to find people, more people on our pipeline and more people to take our offers, because it's a tough market currently.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a challenge for you, regardless of where you are geographically and
in terms of in the entire world.
Yeah, today it's very global. Pretty cool. And how exactly you're doing the onboarding? Is there a structured process as well, or does it vary per function in terms of the overall structure? Meaning it's
pretty structured, actually. So it depends a little bit on which team, because you don't do the same thing, obviously, if you're an engineer or a marketer. But it's pretty structured. Everyone, the first week is usually pretty free for you to meet people and get familiar with all the different tools we're using, creating accounts, all of that takes some time. Then we actually have success rotation, which I don't know if users notice that, but sometimes they see new names that they don't see after when responding to their emails. That's basically every new employee from like junior level to like, we had a VP finance and VP people starting over the last 3 weeks, and they are answering your emails as well.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Email them. So people do that for 2 weeks. First week on the easier, like more frontline, quick questions from the team, from users, and then what we call the backline, that is more bug investigation. Right. So that's something that we do. Then we have actually a bubble test to validate your knowledge of the bubble product. I mean, you're laughing, but it's actually a challenge, right? Because when you're a product like ours that has so much functionality, our users are very often much more expert at the product than our team. And the success team, not so much, because they can learn on the job, because they get exposed to whatever users are asking them.
Right.
But for engineers, actually, who write code, it's important to know the product well. And it turns out they don't use it as much as our users, right? And so we try to find ways to accelerate that learning. And now, so we've produced a bubble test that it's a little bit academic, you have to type responses and build its little exercises, but that's one thing that people have to do. And then they start the work. And so that takes about 4 weeks.
That's pretty cool. That's actually also a very, very impressive onboarding duration, because we, for example, have a longer duration period for people getting accustomed to building on Bubble and learning in Bubble in general.
I mean, I wouldn't call that the only onboarding, because, for instance, for an engineer, you're going to be put on like special projects at first to start getting more comfortable with the code base. You're going to be, working with other engineers who will review your code more. So overall, I would say onboarding is probably, 3 months or something before someone really is able to contribute a lot. But the most structured part that is not necessarily meant for you to start working, but more to learn, is about 4 weeks.
Pretty cool. So key takeaways here: expose your new employees to the real users of your application to kind of get a feel of what they are experiencing every day, and then do a test of your product. That's definitely a great takeaway here. So so I'm guessing that we kind of slowly shifted to the discussion about the team culture. So it looks like the culture is pretty hands-on, user-focused. How would you describe your culture? So how does it actually work? So how do you define it, if you will? Obviously, it's a very wide term, but how do you brief the people in that are joining your team about what your culture is like?
That has been something we've iterated on quite a bit. I mean, every company has a culture at first, obviously, right? But it does take a little bit of time to formalize it. And at some point, it's necessary to do this as you scale, because we don't necessarily know everyone anymore. Like I know most of the names on the team, but there are some people that I've only interacted like a couple of times.
Right.
I want to say unfortunately, even though that's kind of the nature of the beast. So every about 18 months to 2 years so far, we've been doing a work looking back at the values, the document we produced describing our culture, and seeing, okay, does it still make sense or not? And the last iteration of it is actually pretty good. It's actually public. So if you go to bubble.io/values, you would see actually our values. Because the point of a value, and then I'll respond to your question, how would I describe it? But the point of values is as much to tell how we want to behave with each other once people are in the house, in the company, but it's also a way for people to self-select. Like you don't necessarily want people who, the point of having that on our website is that if someone reads this and doesn't like it, then it's better if they don't come because they're not going to be happy. Now, when you look at the values we have, that is, empowerment. I mean, it's kind of like the fundamental story of the company is to empower people to do things. And so we want people who care about that. Genuineness, we tend to be pretty direct and transparent. We don't play politics, and we don't like that if you do this. So that's what we mean by this. User centricity means that at some point, the most important is making sure the users can achieve what they want to achieve. And that comes down to our very early years where, I would personally do like add features when people would ask them, sometimes probably too much, sometimes actually I probably have been weak and I should have said, no, we won't do that. But at some point, we also wanted to make sure people really could realize what they wanted to realize. And then kindness, and that's something that I'm actually very proud of what we've achieved so far. We basically only have nice people on the team. It sounds obvious, but the truth is not every company is like that. Some companies are totally fine having aggressive people because it creates some value. Like they think, it's going to motivate people to work harder. I mean, it's a little bit of a prejudice, but, the finance industry, I don't think drives around kindness, whatever they say. And it's fine, like it just depends on what you want. And so that's something that whenever we have someone who interviews with us, whether they take the job or not, they always say this was one of the nicest interview processes that we have. Like we don't play well with mean people. Now, you kind of want, the values that you have on your website to be discriminant a little bit so that when people read them, they don't like them. So on that one, I don't know if what we have, people would, truth is people would disagree with empowerment and kindness. We need people to make sure they understand what we mean by that and decide, is that the kind of vibe I want to have at the office? So if you look at our site, actually, we describe pretty thoroughly what we mean by those different values. It's not just like 4 words. We actually give examples of how that impact things in practice. And so now we're being more structured. I think we've had that page for the last 4 or 5 months, which is very important. Again, at the time where you're hiring so many people and interviewing so many people, it's important that everyone on the team is clear about what the values are when people ask them, and that candidates also are clear.
That's very cool. Speaking about the evolution of this, considering that, again, maybe some people are considering, okay, is it really the good time for me to create that document or that kind of a reference? And let's say I'm a 3-person team or a 5-person team. What would be the moment where you think that creation of something like that would clearly formulate the values of the company is a good time for a company to work on, to spend on? Because it's obviously something that will take some time and energy, and probably something that will evolve, but still.
I'm going to give you an annoying response because it's not going to say too much, but I think it's never too early if you can allocate the time to do that and if you feel the pain. So as soon as you start feeling the pain, do it. And it's probably better to do that sooner rather than later. And if you start seeing signals that something is missing, don't think twice, just do it. So if you have 3 people, probably not. If you have 7, 8 people, it's probably fine if you did the right hires. But if for whatever reason, a couple of people are not the right culture, then it's probably time to do it. And I would almost say take action. Like the value of doing that is also a way for people to decide whether they want to be part of this or not. So it's actually pretty valuable process in-house. If some people might just, if you work with that, produce that document. Now you have different ways to do that. We usually do that in a fairly collaborative way. So it has pros and cons. Some people might decide not to do that way, actually. But it does lead some people sometimes to question, hey, I'm not sure this is actually the team I want to be part of, and then they leave, and it's fine. In this market, people find jobs. In the tech industry, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
But it's definitely valuable to do that on the sooner side.
Thank you. It's a great answer. Definitely. I think this can pretty much be an answer for a lot of questions. If you feel the pain and you have the time, you should go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and these kind of structural things that don't seem value creating compound really over time. It's easy to be like, it's internal, whatever, it's painful, but let's fix that next year. My experience is that it's usually a mistake.
Right. Did you have the case when people were, let's say, agreeing to a certain value, or maybe to the set of values on the interview, and then on the job, when actually the rubber meets the road, it was somehow different, or they still misunderstood?
And that always happens, right? Because the interview process is not always catching everything. I think we're doing a pretty fine job. Actually, like one of our kind of landmark interview is what we call the life experience interview. And is actually trying to, so it's not like structured, it's not asking you about what your job is going to be. It's really about asking about your experience. And we've been able to have a pretty good training for this, to train the team to catch this thing. So I think we're doing fine, but of course, it's never 100% perfect. I mean, again, you're always going to be making hiring mistakes.
Right.
It's fine. So and you know, someone doesn't work out, you move on, you try again.
Okay. And speaking about the founders, do you usually have those conversations yourself, or is there a people team that is handling most of that by now? Like hiring and firing, let's say, those two critical.
I mean, you usually this kind of things, always come to the founder. I mean, we're still at the point where most candidates, Josh and I both see them, and sometimes for some reasons, if one of us is not available, at least one person sees them. Like, we don't hire people without at least one of us seeing the candidate.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So shifting gears and switching to the topic, the pandemic. So we heard a lot of questions being sent your way about how pandemic impacted business, the technology, the overall traction and attitude. Definitely, overall, it was a step in the right direction. So for all the no-code deals in Bubble in particular, you guys increasing your user database and also securing the amazing founding round and very recently. But the important thing that we do not hear a lot of people talking about enough is how this impacted the company culture and the overall, let's say, hiring and team building dynamic. So how did exactly the pandemic affect the Bubble team in both good and bad ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not going to be unique on that one. The first few weeks, at first it was kind of weird and fun. It's like, okay, now we're all going to be on Zoom. Let's see what happens. Then Zoom became, okay, wow, this is going to be like that every day. And not only I'm on Zoom every day, but I can't go out at night, because I actually think this is a bigger problem here, right? There is a thing which is working remotely, but more importantly, people had nothing else to do than being in front of their computer with the confinement, depending on the regions you were in. New York was hit pretty badly in April and May last year. But then what we had, which other companies didn't always have, and that's something that I reminded the team pretty much every week when we were to do our all hands, is, let's remember we are the fortunate ones here, because at the point where our numbers really started like going up because of, people had more time, we could get into why that was good for no code, but effectively number of users was going up and revenue was going up in a way that was abnormal compared to the overall economy. And so that helped us have the first few months going pretty easily, because people were grateful. People were having around them people who had been laid off. After the economy started booming again, because a lot of cash is being injected in the economy. But at the very beginning, like if you remember in the US, the employment rates skyrocketed. I think in May or June, like terribly, because a lot of businesses were like freaking out and be like, okay, we can't work like this. And so that helped a lot. And then we started building the team remotely because, well, that's what we have to do anyway. So that means that we have quite a few people that I've never met in person. It's fine, actually. I feel like I still know them, even if I haven't met them in person. I'm looking forward to meeting them. I mean, we're going to take the team. I think we're going to organize a retreat next year to get the team together. So that's going to be an exciting moment for a lot of people, because people are going to realize how tall people are. Because that's one of the things you don't know, actually.
Yeah, you're pretty tall, actually. So I realized that it was when meeting you in person, that was That was fun.
Yeah, right. And so, but then that changes the culture a little bit. Then the challenge is really how do you scale the culture when people cannot spend time together, when people cannot have drinks together, and this is hard. It goes in waves. My experience that's you have some good periods, you have some tough periods, and so you need to be kind of proactive and reactive, and keep experimenting. Try to find social events that work remotely. When it's safe to get people together, please do it. Try to do it. There are a couple of things you can do. The good news, though, I mean, it's not the good news, but it's not like Bubble is doing worse than others. Like the entire world is working that way. So let's just figure out. Well, interestingly enough, I mean, our New York office is being more and more busy. Actually, people are going back to the office out of their own volition.
Right. So to extend that question, so why do you think, if I understand correctly, you did not have the remote hires before the pandemic, right? So everyone was in office pretty much.
Yeah.
So why do you think didn't you pull the plug earlier? So why didn't you think that reaching out for people remotely is actually a good idea to grow the team? Because as you said, the talent is scarce and the competition is fierce. Obviously, you'll have more.
I mean, at that point, we were small enough that it was fine to hire people locally. It's not necessarily, I mean, being remote is not necessarily a win in every dimension. Like some companies are actually going to move back to not being remote, I think. So there is a cost associated to being remote. We pretty much decided that it was worth it for us, but it's definitely a risky move. It's probably a good thing that, the pandemic forced us to make that move. I think it's good. But there are a lot of reasons why, it didn't necessarily seem like a reasonable thing to do when we just had 10 people and not too much.
What do you think about this now? So what are the pros and cons, and what would be your kind of, let's say, vision moving forward as a company? What's your preference, hiring remotely or hiring in the office?
I think it's going to be in the middle, honestly. So we'll call it a hybrid model. We're pretty committed to keeping an in-office culture because it works better with some people, and at the same time making it work for people who are not in New York that we think would bring great things for the team. Some of them being already employees. Like we hired some people during the pandemic that would never move. They have a family, they built a house, and we were telling them, yes, we're not expecting you to move. But also we keep hiring remotely if we find great talent. Operationally, it's a little bit challenging. It's a little bit more costly to have both an office and a remote culture. You need to figure out how to make those meetings work. What is the right AV system so that you don't harm the experience in the office, but you still want people remotely to be able to participate and understand what's going on. So
do you have any suggestions of how do you do you have any suggestions of how do you do that? Because I think it's a challenge for everyone who is trying out the remote culture while still having a team in the office and kind of sitting on a fence. So
it's too early to give an advice. I'm talking about AV systems because that has been really a thing for us, actually, figuring out the right AV system. And I'm not sure we have. I mean, we're trying. We've built some things, and we're going to see how that works. But I would say, I mean, as long as you find people that are willing to make it work, if the teams want to make it work, then it works, and then you need both sides to be understanding. You need people in the office to understand that we have to cater to people that are remotely. You need people who are remote. We need to understand that we're going to do in-office events that they won't be part of because they're not in the city, and as long as both sides understand the problems of the other side, and that's really where it matters to have a cohesive culture, you'll figure out ways.
Right. So what exactly are you doing to keep the remote people engaged? I mean, it's a challenge for everyone, I think. It's easy to do a team building. It's easy to order some pizza to the office and go to the movies. So how do you actually engage
a lot of people have started offering stuff for remote events. We've done quite a bit of them. Some of them are good. Some of them are not as good, but that's fine. You send gifts. We send gifts for holiday seasons, for instance. We try to do things so that people are engaged. When someone visits a city, usually they would reach out to whoever it is in that city so that they can meet up in person. And then, and that one hasn't happened yet because of the travel restrictions. But we're going to put together a retreat early next year, which I think is, at the end of the day, that's kind of the most important you can do here. Get people together once,
at some point.
Template.
Yeah, I agree. We also did the same for our team, and it worked like charm. So definitely recommend it. Get people to talk in person at least a couple of times, once, and it will kind of take care of itself from there.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a question actually from the audience. I think it's a good time for this one. So how exactly the team is structured right now? So how many people, let's say, do you split team by departments or by teams? So how exactly does it work internally?
Yeah, I mean,
people
I wouldn't say departments because I don't think we're that big yet, but yeah, we have like teams. It's usually structured in teams, and then within teams you have pods. So it's not going to be revolutionary. You're going to have the engineering team with engineers, I think about like 18 or 19 of them, of various level of seniority. Then you're going to have product, that's going to be product managers and designers. And one bubbler, actually. We hired someone to keep building our app on Bubble. So that's leading product. Then we have growth and marketing with different pods. And so, yeah, engineering is structured in different pods, whether you're working on like the infrastructure, whether you're working on the in-editor experience, which is like responsive. If you're working on like what we call the language pod, which is basically features what you can express and the functionalities that Bubble Apps can have, so stuff like that. Then growth and marketing, you have different people doing, content, partnerships, paid acquisition, boot camps. We have a sub team under marketing that does boot camp, which is like our offering to teach people how to use Bubble, which is what we'll do for Black Friday. I think the team is working on a special deal for boot camp for Black Friday. And then the success team, which today is probably like 12 people, I think. That are going to be structured between what we call the front line, that is more like immediate response and immediate investigation, and backline that takes more time because you need to investigate and do some success management for our bigger users. Like when users start reaching a certain volume and our dedicated plans, we start spending quite some time with them. So nothing too revolutionary here, honestly. And there is a reason for that. Companies work pretty well that way.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
I mean, so back to the remote culture, one of the challenges that we have, and everybody has, I think, is subculture tend to be pods and teams tend to have their own culture and be siloed a little bit.
Yep.
And so you need to break that. It's not easy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Okay. How about the growth of that? So what's your plan for, let's say, this year and the next year? To which quantity do you think you guys will be growing? Because definitely you're growing almost every month, but is there a definite number in mind, or do you kind of take it as it goes?
I mean, we do our financial planning, aiming for this kind of revenue so that we know how much we can spend, and we have the money we have in the bank, like we have our constraints. The thing that is the most actionable for us and where we spend most of our time is really building the team across, all functions. So we're probably looking at doubling the team next year. So that's going to be a busy year, but that's what it is. In terms of revenue, we have our goals, but it's not necessarily like something we decide, okay, this is what's going to happen, and we have ways, to make sure that happens, pushing on different strategies. But that's something that, is more micro, what can you do on an ongoing basis to hit your goals? And then, keep pushing the product. We have I've already discussed that quite a few times publicly, so I'm not sure we need to get into this too much, but,
right.
Working on performance and scalability improves the ease of use and onboarding, in ease of learning, kind of do an overhaul of our educational content, which it's fine. It's better than before, but I think we can do better here to more accompany users better. Probably start, looking at, agencies a little bit more as the growth driver for us. How can we, help agencies to be more successful on the platform? Try to solidify a little bit our brand and our communication, because I think right now a lot of our communication is not necessarily super airtight, but that was fine because our users are doing our marketing. Like we're very community driven. But as you start thinking about putting marketing money to work, you want to make sure you're doing that on the right messaging. So we're doing some work there. Like kind of, in some ways, I would say, let's professionalize everything we do.
Pretty cool.
It's a lot of polishing.
Oh yeah, definitely. Speaking about polishing and the overall, let's say, workload, if you were to guesstimate how much of, let's say, of the 100% of your time is spent on building the team, building the product, or doing some, let's say, more founder stuff. So what does your day actually look like these days? Because it's definitely very different from, let's say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, not too much building the product anymore. Yeah, it's probably 30 to 40% hiring, 30% to 40% managing the team, meaning discussing with them about getting them to deliver either on building the product, building on the marketing, building the structure, with finance and people. And then maybe 20%, I think that's where I'm left on stuff like what I'm doing right now. Like that's the one thing that, still goes at the founder level is selling the vision and doing that either, to investors, even though right now we don't really do that because we just closed the round, to prospective users and employees. Communication is a big part of the job.
Oh, for sure. Zooming in on the team management, which you mentioned. So how exactly does that process look like? Because you mentioned that there's a lot of pods, they're all doing various things. So how exactly they're communicating one with another? How are you prioritizing the tasks for the company, the team, the subset of teams, and who's taking those decisions, who's pulling the triggers? How does that work?
I mean, it depends a little bit on each team, each team has its own processes on this, but well, that's why the product team exists. I mean, product team at the end of the day, they don't build products, right? The product is built by the engineering team, but the product team is here to set the priorities and make sure the right cadence and the right communication is set up. Success will have their priorities in terms of, how can we better scale and handle more users? Let's say tomorrow we have twice the time of users. How many more people do we need to do that? Can we find ways to be more efficient? And then we try not to have too many meetings, even though that's something that happens pretty quickly at some point when you start having a lot of people. You start having meetings, and we try to look into ways to reduce the number of meetings and have more of a written culture, which also works better in a remote setting. But then communication, I mean, it's going to be, Zoom calls, Slack, and emails, even though we try to do a little bit less emails.
Okay. But there's no, let's say, preferred routine. So some people are fans of Scrum. So let's say Agile is the best.
We do, but then each team has it, like the product team and the engineering team work on their own interpretation of Agile. Growth and marketing, it's on a weekly basis. Success, I think it's on a weekly basis as well.
Okay, so you're kind of letting go and letting the teams decide for themselves what works best for them.
Yeah, because I think each team has different imperatives on that one.
Okay, definitely. So speaking about zooming out and to kind of looking at things from your position. So what's the hardest part right now for you for being a co-founder and the CEO of a company at this stage? So what's the biggest challenge?
Right now, I don't have enough hours in the day to do everything that I need to do. And in particular, I wish we could hire faster, including for some of the more senior roles. That's the most blocking factor for me today. Like today, I'm in a position where I have to manage some aspects of the business that I don't think I'm great at. And I wish, I know for sure that there are some people on the market that are better than me to do that. And so finding these people takes a lot of time, and that's a blocking factor.
Did you have any issues with delegation? I believe that this is something that every founder face at some point where you know that you can do this better than someone and you're kind of reluctant to give away.
No, I did not, because it's been many, many years. I think people have that issue when it's like, maybe 2 years in or 3 years in and they want to control everything. After 9 years, I've been on this for 9 years and a half now. I'm very willing to delegate. In fact, I would love to delegate everything.
Yeah, that's a definitely a mature approach. Okay,
but it's easier because I think I can see some founders when they're younger, less experienced. They want to make sure it remains their baby. I don't need that. Like, I know it's my baby, and I know that baby needs to grow. And a mature organization is an organization that can survive the founders leaving. And I'm not planning on going anywhere. Josh is not planning on going anywhere. But if for whatever reason we were not able to work on this, the company needs to survive, right? And so delegation is absolutely necessary here.
Pretty cool.
Delegation and empowerment.
Yeah. speaking about you and Josh, so I'm getting that this probably was a dynamic thing, meaning that the way it worked previously is not the way it's working right now, and maybe in 5 years this will be working completely different. But what is the general, let's say, way for you guys to split the responsibilities? So how did you agree on that? Did it come naturally, or was there like a bit of a back and forth? So how do you split the
both
things to be done?
It comes naturally, but there is some back and forth. It took some iterations. I think the first split we did was not working extremely well, but we kind of had no way. I mean, the truth is we're both on the product for many, many years. And I was in particular on the design part of the product for many, many years. And so it didn't necessarily make sense that I was not involved in that, because I knew our design principles better than anyone. But on the flip side, if he's managing the engineers and product in general, how can I help with design? It's get a little bit messy. And so it takes some iteration to figure out exactly how to get involved at the right time. At some point on that one, we both just want what's most efficient here. Like, I don't think we're too opinionated. And we tend to be pretty in agreement, I think, in agreement on who's better at what. Like, it's rare that you would hear Josh say, hey, I'm better than you at that. And it's like, no, I'm better than you at that. So we're both pretty self-aware on what we're good at and not good at. That doesn't mean it's entirely easy, because so for instance, on the product side, Josh is better than me for some aspects, but I'm better than him on some other aspects. And so we need to figure out, how we can get the best. But also at some point, let's keep in mind, and that's, I think, something very important for any founder out there, is that don't aim for perfection. Perfection is not what you need. You need to be good enough here. And so you have to be pragmatic. So that's how way to do it. Today, we're pretty clear in our responsibilities. Josh manages product and engineering, and I manage, success, growth, marketing, finance, and people ops. It's a pretty standard split. A lot of companies operate that way.
Right. Okay.
But that doesn't mean I don't look at the product, and that doesn't mean I don't have firm opinions on what the product should look like.
Of course, this is your baby.
Yeah. And I've looked at it many, many years. For many, many years, like every single day, every time that I was awake, I was looking at it. So.
By the way, a side question about what you just said. It was interesting to me personally that Josh is almost never publicly speaking about Bubble. I read a few of his blog posts, and that's pretty much it. So he was, and maybe some very early on interviews about the product. So was this an agreement, a decision? Did he happily delegate that to you?
No, I mean, he's pretty involved in the forum, actually, like the community updates.
For sure.
It depends. I mean, well, that's a little bit part of my job. When you do the marketing and growth side of things and communities, that involves probably being a little bit more external facing. That being said, it's not going to be like that forever. Like, I'm expecting Josh to show up more, so you'll see him.
That's exciting. All right, thank you for sharing that insight. There was, I think, a couple of great questions like that, but this was also on my list of things to ask you. If you would start from the beginning, let's say, knowing what you know right now, with the experience that you have right now, what would be the main things that you would do differently? Obviously, there will be a ton of things that you will do differently, but let's say the key decision points, the key turning points. Would you change some things today, knowing what you know?
I mean, I would definitely try to hire people sooner, because it's been a little bit difficult and painful to scale that late. Because when you don't hire people and you just have like a very, very small team, every month that goes by is more knowledge that you don't have put on paper, because you have other things to do, that will be difficult to transmit to the next hire. And so you don't want to wait too long. So I would have tried to do that. From a product standpoint, I mean, we made mistakes. We didn't do like the most optimal design choices for some stuff, but it's not even mistakes. That's what it is. You learn and you iterate on that. But yeah, building the team is something I would have tried to do sooner.
Okay.
Now, looking at it though, as it is, I'm not sure it would have been super possible. So I'm not sure I have like huge regrets, but in a perfect world, I would have tried to do that.
Okay, but I'm guessing that this was a conscious decision, because, okay, if
and it was a mistake. We should have hired like we should have found a way to get a marketer on the team sooner, for instance. It was a mistake.
What was the argument of not hiring sooner, let's say in marketing? Because there probably was some argumentation, and I'm sure that a lot of people are kind of in that mode. Okay, I can do it myself. I don't need more people. They're wasting my time, kind of thing. And I'm sure that every founder, let's say a single founder or even a 2-founder team, kind of passes through that moment.
We used to say, and I think looking back, it's true in some cases, but not all the time. It was a mistake that until you know how to know a job yourself, you shouldn't hire someone to do it because you're not going to be able to manage them properly. And I think it's true for some stuff, but sometimes it is valuable to bring people on board that don't have the same skill set and can do things you can do. So that was, I think, our logic for some time, and it was not entirely the right one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I think one of our bigger mistakes, I guess.
So you think?
But it's fine. I mean, it's not like it's not a mistake that's going to kill you. You know, it's just you just keep going.
Yeah, for sure. Last but not least, I'm sure that looking back at the last 9 years, there was definitely a lot of ups and downs, lots of learning, lots of iterations. So, and you mentioned a couple of mistakes as well. What was the do you have any, let's say, a curious story about a certain mistake or a failure, maybe a success that came with an extra punch? Let's say, I don't know, hiring that new that first hire for yourself was a good example of, okay, kind of a learning thing. Okay, if you meet a person that you have a great conversation with that does not necessarily the best hiring decision. So maybe something along those lines. So kind of a learning that you would like to share with the people.
Learning over the last 9 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's a learning, but I guess it's a piece of advice that worked well for us. If you start a company, you have to be willing to go. You have to start it thinking it's going to take 10 years. Like if you look at companies and recent successes and you're like, wow, in 3 years, they raised like that amount of money. It's insane. This is 1 out of like 100. And even then, they're still probably going to be doing it for 9 years. It's just they made it to the news before most companies. And so that means don't be in a rush to get your product to the market. Don't be in a rush to try to get validation from the market. Like there are a lot of things that I see people sometimes rushing too much. To give you like a super practical example, I think people try to get traction on press or like platforms like Product Hunt too soon. Like they try to do that at a point where they can't make the best of the opportunity because they haven't really baked their product enough to do that. And so if you get in entrepreneurship with a mindset it's going to take 10 years, you kind of look at time in a little bit of a different way, and that usually ends up for the best. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to always settle for a long time. I mean, if at some point something is not working out, you should take action and move on. But yeah, make sure that, when you start something, you want to be there for 10 years. And by the way, it's also a way for people to know, should I be part of that company? Should I be part of that project? I think it's actually the right thing to ask yourself is, do I want to be there for 9 years? Am I willing to spend a decade on this? Am I passionate enough to spend a decade on that? If you're not, it's probably not the right opportunity for you.
Right. Okay. We actually have a super fast quiz before we transition to more of the questions coming from the audience. It is just to kind of break it down and relax a little bit. So don't take it too seriously. Just answer whatever with the first thing that comes to mind. So for yourself personally, is it tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Books or podcasts?
Books. I actually don't listen to podcasts, which is a shame because I do a ton of them, but I don't.
That is a discovery. Okay, that's pretty cool. Are you more of a morning person or a night person?
Morning.
Okay. So remote or office, but I think I have my response here.
I would have said office before, but now that I have a baby, it's a little bit tricky. But because it's nice to work from home when you have a baby.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
It can be annoying when the baby screams, but it's also nice to be able to see her between meetings.
For sure. Yeah. That changes a lot of things. And well, that kind of the same thing, but Zoom or a meeting in person?
If I can, meeting in person.
Okay, pretty cool. One last thing about from our kind of our fast questions kind of thing. So I'm sure that you're looking at a lot of things that are built in Bubble these days. I mean, with over 1 million users doing stuff all the time, and maybe you get to see things that you didn't expect. And you shared a couple of stories before when, you know, someone was saving their relationship with Bubble applications. There's definitely a lot of stories about people building serious businesses, like in finances and in pretty much every industry with Bubble. But what is the craziest idea that you saw so far of being built on Bubble, or maybe you think that should be built on Bubble but hasn't been built yet? So what's your vision as of today?
I mean, so as you pointed out, with 1 million users, like we actually lose track of what people are building. And so sometimes we discover in the news, someone says, hey, this company raised that amount of money. And we're like, wait, it's a Bubble app. And we didn't know. And that's really something that it's kind of a problem, actually. It's something we're trying to figure out. You know, how can we automate discovering what our users build? Because it's very important for us. The craziest thing I've seen, it's a little bit challenging to define what you mean by crazy, honestly.
Yeah, just something that impresses you the most, I guess.
It's usually like the level of dedication people put in their design and the flows. Like I'm starting to see like very beautiful apps that are like, people often say, you know, like you can build beautiful apps on Bubble. And I'm aware that, and now it's changing with our new responsive engine, but it's not necessarily the easiest, but you certainly can if you put the dedication. And I've seen people do that and do that very well. So that's what I would call impressive. In terms of functionality, Bubble is so open-ended today that there's not much you can do. Like I don't think there is something like crazy, someone trying to build something on Bubble and I would tell them you're crazy to do that, except if they're telling me, hey, I'm building a machine learning algorithm, but actually a machine learning algorithm is not a product. So of course it's not going to be built on Bubble, right? It's an algorithm. But anyone trying to build a product today can probably do it if you know how to combine the different things we have. So I don't think there is anything crazy anymore. I guess the crazy things that what I've seen is how small the teams are and how much revenue and how much traffic they generate because they can do it on something like Bubble. That's what is crazy. You know, when you see companies actually making lot of money, not raising a dime, like a couple of people doing that and doing that without being engineers, that's pretty cool and that's crazy. I can't share details here, but I'm seeing like pretty exciting stuff being built there.
Yeah, we're hoping to read more about these
honestly,
in your
like,
blog.
For everyone in the audience, you know, keep surprising me. Like, surprise me on what's I'm building crazy shit. And when you build something crazy, let us know. This is actually very important. I want to know about them.
You got it, guys. So let Emmanuel know if you think you're up to something crazy.
Yep.
He'll be happy. I'll make him happy. So we still have a few more questions from the audience that we didn't yet cover that I think are pretty interesting. So there was a question from a team wondering, like, what would be your advice about the first hire? Let's say it's a standard setup. There are two co-founders. One is the builder, so-called. One is the, let's say, the seller, so-called. So what do you think should be the first hire typically? Because obviously there's no one size that fits all, but what would be the first thing that comes to mind?
I mean, that's where it's tricky. When I was mentioning, you know, hire people to do jobs that you've already done. You have two schools of thoughts here, and it's not entirely clear which one is better. It depends a little bit on circumstances. Either hire someone that can do something you cannot do and complement you, or hire someone to do something that you're already doing, but you're not being super creative at doing that anymore, and you can have someone else do it and teach them how to do that so that you can focus on other things. It's hard to tell exactly which one is better. It depends a little bit on circumstances. If I had to pick, let's put it this way. I think most people would give you the easy response to that is hire someone who complements you. So for that, because of that, I will use the other one and say, try to find someone who can, you know, provide you with some leverage so that you can focus your time on new things. Because as a founder, you're going to have to figure out a ton of things anyway. But in practice, you're going to have to do both. And then it's just about, you know, which one comes first, and probably, you know, have someone who complements you, have someone to provide you some leverage with something you're currently doing and doing well, and then move back.
This is great advice. Thank you. Another question about your latest funding round, and it's kind of related to what we've been talking about today. So the $100 million from investors makes you more relaxed overall or more stressed?
Probably more relaxed, but busier.
Yeah.
So then it depends where stress is coming from. If stress is coming from the number of meetings every day, probably more stress, but in terms of making sure the business can go for a long time, probably more relaxed.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Another question about the future of Bubble. So there was a few different ways to phrase that, but what's, let's say, your vision for the team and for the product in 5 to 10 years, and how different it is from where you are right now? I mean, obviously, you will keep on working on making the product better, making the product more useful, and spreading the word and kind of bringing it to people. But is there something that you have in mind that would be like a global shift, or like a new stage or new step that maybe people are already talking about, on something that you have in mind, obviously, that you're able to share?
I mean, if you think about the long-term vision, like 5 to 10 years from now, probably in between, we want to be the platform that everybody uses to build anything. That's really what we're betting on here, regardless of the size of the organization, from like the high schooler building a project to the biggest companies or governments in need of web products to build things. So then the question is, what needs to happen on the way to get there? And so that means expanding into new things and new markets. And it's probably going to be namely two things. At some point, expand into bigger accounts and larger organizations. We're already having some big uses. I mean, we have a couple of Fortune 100 companies using us pretty seriously, but it's not something we've pushed, and we will get there at some point. And then mobile platforms. There might be new platforms that come up, and that one, it's a big project. So that's the two transformations that I see in the coming 5 years. It's probably not something that will happen in the next 18 months, though. I think we have a lot of work to just saturate the current market where we're on and really evangelize. I mean, it's at some point, the opportunity ahead of us is immense, right? Because software is everywhere. Some software is expensive. Like some people sometimes ask us what your market, and this is a no-code market. And I'm like, no, I mean, the no-code market is not our market. Our market is a software development market, which is one of the biggest markets in the world. Like some people mentioned $600 billion. I don't even know where the number is from, and it's probably another statement. It's probably bigger than that. And that's really the market we're going for. And so we need to educate people to make sure people start using us, and we're not competing, with other no-code tools here. Like what we're trying to do is really make sure that, we grow the pie of no-code because it's good for business, but also because it's good for the world. I mean, no-code is a better way to build, like at the end of the day. That's and we need to keep improving the product to make sure that's a reality. But no-code is a better way to build. We need more people to use it. Hopefully, Bubble is the right tool for them. I think so, because it's a more powerful tool. But there can be use cases where other tools work better. I can see that. But just make sure that we educate people about all the possibilities and opportunities, and make sure more people use us. And so whether we're going to mobile or whether we're going to enterprise, it's just a way to expand our reach there, basically.
Bubble is definitely a great tool to do that. I approve. Another question from the audience. So if you had to take a wild guess, what do you think is the number of Bubble users by year 2030? Maybe you have that in your plans or your strategy. Or maybe there's a less distant future.
2030, so in 9 years from now?
Yep.
I mean, hopefully 500 million people.
I hope. That's very ambitious.
It is ambitious, I hope so.
Very, very realistic also.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, these kind of things accelerate over time.
Yeah.
And not just for us, for no code in general.
Yeah, definitely. Another question from the guys. What are the current main Bubble needs in terms of staff? So who are you most, let's say, interested in? Obviously, everyone.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
so check out the Bubble.
It is everyone, but I would say engineering and success first. Marketing, we need people, but marketing is usually, we push. So if we're limited by the people we have, that means we can do less things. It's a problem, but it's not like putting more pressure on the business. success in engineering is like, we need more people. Like our users are growing pretty quickly right now. We need more people to help them on the success front. And more users means either more feature requests or more bug fixes, or more infrastructure work to do on the product side, and that means more engineering.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
And if people in this audience, because I expect a lot of bubblers to be in the audience, like we're definitely looking for success people. We have different ways to call them, like technical product specialists, but basically people to help other bubblers on our end to get better at using Bubble and help them with their issues.
Okay. Yeah, by the way, I started, for all you folks interested, look up the bubble.io/jobs section. Definitely, there's a lot of opportunity for people who are on the same page with Emmanuel about his vision. And you can check that out at bubble.io/values.
Yes.
Definitely go visit both of these and let us know how we can help. Last question from me. And it's not related to specifically any particular topic that we've been talking about, but obviously 9 years is a long time, and we're definitely hoping that we see you for at least a few times that much as a company and as an entrepreneur, as an individual. This definitely takes a lot of energy and a lot of passion to be going for so long and carrying on this passion for what you do. So what inspires you the most as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a founder, to go all that way? Because there's definitely not an easy thing to do. And this is not it's not a quick thing, as you said, not an easy thing, a lot of discoveries, a lot of mistakes. So what keeps you going? What inspires you?
I mean, I started this thinking that this was probably the most important problem I can work on, given my skill set. And I mean, today, with the pandemic, I think more problems have showed up. But overall, I think, access to technology, computer literacy is one of the big problems we need to fix. And the more it goes, the more I feel I'm even more qualified to actually solve it. Like today, I think I'm one of the 5 people in the world who actually can have a real stab at fixing this problem. And why would I change that? Because what I'm driven by is having a sense that I'm doing something useful and that I fix like important problems. And so that's what has been me going on for so long. If at some point I realize that some people might be better than me to do that, either me as a company or me individually, that's where I would stop thinking, okay, maybe I need to do something else with my life. But right now, I feel like we're in the best position to do something good here. Still a long way to go, but it'd be a shame to not do that today. And again, at some point, I start thinking, okay, where do I have the biggest assets to be successful at doing something? And I think today that's going to be no code, I guess, like if no code is a way to solve that problem. I think because no code is so hot today in the news, people don't always understand how important the problem we are tackling is,
Right.
Living in a world where less than 1% of the world population builds everything is very, very dangerous. And it's dangerous in multiple ways. It's dangerous because you end up, soon we'll be in a world where if you can't use a computer, program a computer, you will not find jobs, because that's where the value creation happens. And value creation happens through programming and automation. And so if more people can do it, that means people won't find jobs. And then what's going to happen?
Right.
If people don't have jobs, nothing good happens here. But also, and I think in some ways, the recent things that, some big tech companies have gone through, and Facebook in particular, kind of came up because, it's a very small group of people building the tools that everybody uses, and they don't always think about some implications of the tool they're creating, because they tend to see that through one lens. And without, it's a little bit of maybe it's age, gender, socio-demographics, but effectively, it's one category of people basically building the tools that the rest of the world uses. And I think it's very dangerous. We need to create something where more people, like a more diverse pool of people, can create tools, because otherwise, again, they tend to build things in a way that that have an implication on people that we're not realizing and that we're just starting to realize today. Another way to frame that one is, I think the best ideas in the world usually come from outsiders. And so you want to make sure outsiders can create things, because if they can, then it's a kind of pretty sad thing. And so that's a very big problem. And I think, that's why I can be the most effective today. That's what I can do the best today. And until I decide that someone else is better suited to do that, I will keep doing that.
I think both yourself and Josh and the whole team is doing a great
Let's
job.
not forget the team on that one. I tend to take the light because I'm the external face of the company, but it's been a long time that I wouldn't be able to do that on my own with Josh. So.
For sure. This is exactly why we thought that the session would be interesting, because people tend to, people passionate about their ideas do not usually think about building a team in the first place. And they're kind of thinking, okay, I can do that. This is what's important. This is what's going to change the world. But you very quickly realize that in a lot of cases, maybe not in all of the cases, but in a lot of cases, it's very quickly starts to be about you being able to build the right team, give it the right passion. And I think you're both are doing a great job on that. Definitely a lot of learning for me today, being a founder myself. And I'm hoping that a lot of people that listen to us today and will be listening to this recording later on will also be able to draw something for themselves that will be very valuable for other ideas that might change the world. Maybe not as good as Bubble, but close to that.
I wouldn't say that. Yeah.
Okay. Last but not least, Emmanuel, what is the question that comes to mind when you think about all the stuff that came from the audience today? What was the first?
So where should I see? Because I haven't seen those questions actually.
Yeah, I mean, I've been mostly asking them and remarking them and as coming from the audience. But let's say what's your favorite question from today? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about all the questions? That will be the easiest probably.
I mean, I see Sarah asking what was the best decision ever you took since you start. I mean, that one, sorry to pick that one, but it's an easy one, but was to say yes to Josh as when he offered me to join him, which, I think people already have heard that story, so I won't repeat it, but it was like a one coffee decision. If you think about it, like I did not expect that to have that impact on my life. I thought I would be in the US for a couple of years and then either move back to Europe or move to China, where I had been before business school. And 9 years and a half later, I'm here in the US with a family here. A lot of things basically were impacted by that decision, which was like on the spur of the moment. But
so it's all Josh's fault. We know that now.
It's all Josh's fault. That was a pretty crazy decision, but here I am.
Right. Thank you. Sarah, please contact our team after the meeting at marketing@zeroCode.com. We'll be happy to send towards yourself a little bonus from both ourselves and the Bubble team. And but let's say I think there were a few more questions like that. Is there anything else that comes to mind? I believe that there's been at least one more that deserves
I mean, I'm kind of there are some questions about, when are you going to educate the CIO, CTOs of the world about Bubble to help enterprise digital transformation? Soon. I mean, that's actually something we're looking at right now. Not necessarily starting with CEOs, but we want to improve our product marketing function because I don't think our marketing today makes justice to the product itself. And in particular for technical people actually, because what we're finding out is because of our positioning, which is pretty unique among the no-code tools, at some point when a user does well on the platform, engineers will get involved. And so it's important to make sure that we're something that they trust. And so that's something we're looking at right now.
Awesome. Emmanuel, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You'll not be listening to this podcast, but we're still very grateful for you being around. And it's always a blast. Definitely a different edge of looking at Bubble Journey from the inside today. And I enjoyed it very much. And I see that the people enjoyed that as well. So thank you. You have a wonderful day and talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.